Yashodanandana Pratyayanjana Yashodanandana Jananahanjana Yamunatira Bhajari Yamunatira So, reading of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9. And it's text number. Actually, I'm just going to go back on a few texts, starting with text number 10. So, chapter 9, text number 10, and it's entitled Most Confidential Knowledge. So, Bhagavad Gita so far, up to chapter 9, we've dealt with. I won't go into a recap, too much of a recap now.
There is, sit on this, it's cold. It's cold.
Yeah, it's nice. So, okay, I'll start with text number 10, 9, 10. I'm just going to read the English of some of these. Maya Jakshaya Prakriti Suyate Characharam Hetunaneno Kantaya Jagat Viparavartite. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So here, Krishna's explaining how he's behind everything. If you look at, I don't know if you can see too often in Ireland because there's so many cloudy days, but when there isn't clouds in the sky, you can see all the stars in the sky. And, if you look up and you see the stars, you'll see this absolutely huge amount of activity going on that we've no idea about. I mean, you can have a telescope and go up and see it or whatever, but you don't know what's going on there. You don't know what's going on the moon. You don't know what's going on in the sun. You just kind of think, where somebody says, yes, the sun is doing this, but really, you don't really know what's going on, because you don't even know what's going on next door, in the next building. So we're pretty limited. But if you look at that, can you imagine all of that, the stars, the moon coming, like last night was the Charlotte Purnima. So the moon is appearing in the sky every so often, it's working under a specific energy. The sun is coming up every morning, like it's quite well, usually in Ireland. But it is coming up, even though you can't see it, it's behind the clouds, because it's bright. So these activities are going on. So Krishna is saying that this is happening under my direction, under my order. Is working under my direction, Kanchi. So there's so many gigantic things going on, because there's only one universe and there's millions of universes, according to the Shastra. You're just looking up, this is one universe. So there's billions and billions of universes, it's unlimited practically. And so there's something major going on, and some great power and force who's organizing. So Krishna says that's him, that's who it is. He's telling us, it's just like he's told us many things up until this point. And so he's giving us that piece of information. There's lots more he's giving, but that's in this particular section. So then in the next verse is Avijananti mamuta manusham tanamashritam param bhavamajanato mama bhutamaheshwaram. And this is then he says, the fools deride me when I descend in the human form. Did you not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be? So when Krishna appears in the human form, as he did 5,000 years ago, people don't believe it's God. They don't think it's God. They don't think he would do that. Why would he come here anyway? There's no God. He's just an ordinary human person. But the same person who's controlling all the universes came at that time. Also, as Lord Chaitanya appeared 500 years ago, and on Panchatattva also. So this is that same Lord who's controlling everything down to the microbe. Very tiny things that are going on. If you look very closely at some things, there's masses of activity going on. You look at the sand on a beach, and suddenly you see all these flies, and then there's all these tiny little things going on. Krishna's controlling is part of all of that. This is all happening by Krishna's energy. This verse, I won't go remember it now, but Parasya Shaktir Vividai Vishute Svabhavagatinavalakriyacham, that it's all happening just by Krishna's willing it. He's not even trying to do it, it's just happening. So we are a tiny section of that. So you can imagine all those little insects and whatever, that's all going on. So our cells and all our big worlds, are all going on like that. All the things that we're anxious about, and will I get this, and I go here, will this happen? All of these things are all under Krishna's will. It's all happening by his direction. And so Krishna's giving us that little glimpse into who he is. But then he says, fools deride me when I descend in my human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and I'm the supreme Lord of all that be. They don't understand that Krishna is a transcendental nature. It's beyond even those material things that are going on. He has the transcendental nature. But as the soul, because we're part of Krishna, we're also partly like Krishna in that way too. And that even despite all the material things that are going on, the soul, which is us, is actually beyond all of those things. But the soul, it's like a little wonder that the soul is under the grip of this energy, because this is a very powerful energy, that's controlling the sun, moon, stars, whatever. It's also controlling us. And so we're under that grip. So we don't really understand our real nature. It's very hard for us to understand our real nature. And we can speculate about what it is. Maybe it's like this, and maybe it's like this, and it's like this, and whatever. You can think so many things, but you're not going to be able to come to the end of it because you just don't have the capacity. But that information is given to us by Krishna, because it's spiritual energy, and we can understand it. The material energy, matter can't really understand it, But the soul, which is us, we can understand it. We can understand it as something else beyond this. And the body is like part of the material energy. And the body is kind of like dictating to us, like you're this, you're from here, you're from there. But in a billion years, According to Bhakti Shastra, the soul is eternal. So in a billion years, all that body's, make any difference, whether you're Irish, English, from Pluto, from all these different planets. So it's not going to make any difference. It's not us. But we make a big deal about here and now, and we have a big fight over that. So it behooves the devotee to read Bhagavad Gita and become disentangled from this. That's really what this is about. To become disentangled from this type of thinking. Because it's a very powerful source, as we can see, it's growing the sun, moon, and stars and whatnot. But it's not, it's the same person who's controlling that is controlling us. But we're of a different nature than that. So when that nature is controlling us, it's actually controlling us to come back to him, to come back all the time, to forget about this place. So that's what Bhagavad Gita is doing. That's why it's so different. So Krishna's talking to us about this superior energy or the spiritual energy, and that is beyond this matter. Okay. So Krishna's telling us about all these things, but then he's telling us there's a spiritual energy. So he knows about the spiritual energy. He knows that there is. So he knows that there's a spiritual energy because it's his spiritual energy. So if we listen to Krishna, we'll get some good understanding about what's happening. So then in verse 12, Mogasha, this verse is like, with the words in it, Mogasha, Moga, Jnana, Vichekasa, Raksha, Shim, Ashuram, Shaiva, Prakriti, Mohinim, Shritana. Those who are bewildered are attracted by demonic and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. So Krishna is just explaining that there's any alternative view than the one that he's just expressed is completely a waste of time. And it's demonic energy, deluded, bewildered, atheistic. All of these things, they're all kind of similar, all part of the same, So that's, so Krishna's given us that information. So he's saying you can go and take this information I'm giving you now, that you are spiritual, that you're covered in the material energy, you can get out of it. But if you take an atheistic view that there's nothing happening, it's all based on your own speculation, you're just going to go nowhere. That's what he's basically saying. And then the next verse is the one that we listened to last week. And this is the alternative. Mahatmanastramam partha daivam prakatamashrita bhajantanana manaso gyatva bhutadamadiyam. Usamakrita, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine energy. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. So there's a big words here that are used, and they're under the protection, and we all need protection. We really need protection of the spiritual energy, because we can't do anything without the spiritual energy. But the protection is so vital, valuable. All these different things. And like at the end, Krishna says, just abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender to me. So that word surrender is very important. You have to really know what that is. What does that look like? Surrender means, people think, surrender away, surrender unto you. We don't really, surrender is a big word, because Krishna wouldn't use it, because that's the whole point of Bhagavad Gita. He says it in 1866, just at the very end, Sarva Dharma Parijaya, give up all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So that's what Krishna is saying, basically. And he also says in 7:14, Daiva Yesha Gunamaya Mamamaya Tarachya. Divine energy of mind is very difficult to overcome. Like we're talking about the power of this energy, very difficult to overcome. The material energy, sun, moon, stars, huge energy. All the insects, all inside our hearts, inside our digestive systems, all working. We don't even know how it's going on. It's all working, all exactly as it should be going on. And karma, that's another thing. Karma is is constantly working. We're just living, we're breathing, smelling, touching, but if a minute by minute we're creating karma, if we're in material consciousness, we're doing that, constantly creating. And so this is all being registered and being assimilated, and then being and the result of it being produced. And that's all happening by God's energy, you know. But he wants us to get out of this karma, you know, because we're not actually controlled by karma, you know. But because we're so deluded by this powerful energy, we think that we are, and in fact we are. The soul is completely asleep, you know, doesn't know itself, just completely just going along, identifying with this body, that body, whatever. So therefore, the idea is that we're trying to get outside this karma, and that has us the way we are. So this word Daiviyeshi Gunamai in 7:14, and this divine energy of mine is very difficult to overcome, but anyone who surrenders unto me can easily cross beyond it. You have to learn how to do this surrender. Really do. Really have to do that. And the surrender really means that the ego, which is I'm right. Oh, I'm always right. My family always say that about me. You always think you're right, you know. But that is unfortunately what the ego is. I know how it can be done. Yeah, I've got a better idea how that's to be done. No, don't do it this way. You know, the ego's constantly, you know, being the supreme, so-called. So that's the hardest thing to surrender. You know, there's this sense of I, this foolish sense of I. There is a real sense of I. So having a sense of I is not wrong. That's correct. But who that I is, that's what we get wrong. And if we surrender to Krishna, then he will reveal to us how to be that I, and that's our natural position. So we will learn how to get rid of all the false ego, you know, false sense, that the ahankar. And that's what spiritual life is about. It's about realizing how to get rid of this ahankar, you know. And so it's an exciting, very, very demanding thing. It's not something you can just do on Sunday and come to the temple and it's just pay your basis. It's fine. That's not going to work. You know, it's a minute by minute thing. You come to the temple, you get inspiration from Krishna, beautiful deity in the temple. And, you know, that's in Krishna Sarovar in Vrindavan, beautiful background. Place where Krishna performed so many pastimes with Radha. But that's of course the highest form of love of God. You know, that's when you really get to know who Krishna is. And when you're attached to that form, then you will not even be interested in this material world, because you'll be so you know, absorbed in the spiritual energy, spiritual atmosphere. So, but that's what's there. That's what lies ahead. You know, it's there now, but it's lying ahead as well. You know, that's the magnet which is attracting. Krishna means the all attractive. Not just, you know, you have some religious systems whereby there is, oh no, you cannot see the form of God. Oh no, we don't even mention his name. Oh no, we don't know anything about it. God is so holy, we cannot speak of him. You have spiritual systems which are like that, but they're kind of very, very beginners, you know, beginner systems. They don't speak about God because, you know, probably they think there's some guy like themselves, you know, and for fear of committing offense, they don't treat God like that. But God's not really interested in like that. Like for instance, if we have our relatives, if we know somebody very well, and we just say, hello, you know, as our friend or our brother or sister or mother, you know, just say, hello, you know. It's not really that appealing, you know. So God is the same way, you know. He prefers to have interaction, because that's we're part of God, and we have got individuality in relationship with God. So therefore, the system that is given in Bhagavad Gita is like it's incredible beginning stages, but then we start to hear more about the glories of God, you know, and who God is, what he looks like, what he does, you know, all his activities. And instead of being afraid of that, we embrace it, you know. So, but it takes, as I said at the beginning, this surrender. We have to know how to approach God. Sometimes people, you know, you ask anybody in the street, who's God? They say, well, God is, you know, anybody will have this idea, as though his idea is as good much as, you know, as if anyone can. They think it's just like that, and they say, would you like to be a brain surgeon? Oh no, that's 20 years to learn to be conscious. So you don't think it takes, 20 years to be the person who's created all the brains of the brain surgeons, it takes a bit longer, So, and it takes a lot more study, So that's why Bhagavad Gita gives us that kind of inroad to explain how to understand who God is. And then when we do understand more about God, and the way we do that, of course, is that God explains to us himself. It's not, you can't go to the college and just, okay, I got that mark and I got that result and now I'm fine, tick that box. No, it's if you're not ready, God's not going to allow you. He won't give you that information. But he wants to have us to have that information, but he's only going to do it if we're really ready. And so then we can kind of get into the next stage when we can understand the more intimate pastimes of God. So therefore, this system it's like coming back into the university terms again. It's like the PhD, like understanding God in His most loving aspect is like the PhD of understanding God. And there are other systems which give you the God situation, which is very important. Which you worship God and you bow down and you don't utter His name or you don't understand His form. Okay, fair enough. But it's a very basic understanding. If you want to go deeper, the reason for it is good, because God is great, so you don't want to just willy-nilly just kind of take it for granted. So the reasoning is good, the system is okay, it's fine. But if you want to actually go deeper, the same law is there, that you have to be careful. You can't just think that you'll make it just like that and then you'll understand just like that. No, it's much more. It takes much more real energy to understand it. And this is what this is like. This system is giving us that inroad into that. So it's a very, very special, opportunity. And like any other science, you can test it. You can test it. The way to test it, I believe, the best way to test it is that you can test it on yourself. The main test is how much, and this will be brought up in the next verse, which we're going to read from Bhagavad Gita. The main test is how much are you not interested in this material world, but are only interested in the spiritual world. To the degree that you're interested in this material world is the degree that you're still entangled here. And to the degree that you are absorbed in the spiritual world, to that degree is where you're going. So it's an easy test, It's self-regulatory. You can check on yourself all the time. How much am I attracted to matter? How much am I attracted to spirit? You don't need any kind of overseer to tell you. You can see yourself. Or even if you can't see yourself, then you might have an overseer who can help. So that's what a spiritual guide tries to do. Gives you some help in that area. But now we get on to today's verse. Satatam Kirtan 9:14. Satatam Kirtayanto Mam Vedantascha Judavita Namasyantascha Mam Bhakta Nitya Yukta Upasate. And it says, always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. In your purport. The Mahatma cannot be manufactured by rubber stamping an ordinary man. His symptoms are described here. A Mahatma is always engaged in chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. He has no other business. He is always engaged in the glorification of the Lord. In other words, he is not an impersonalist. When the question of glorification is there, one has to glorify the Supreme Lord, praising His name, His holy name, His eternal form, His transcendental qualities, and His uncommon pastimes. One has to glorify all these things. Therefore, a Mahatma is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who is attached to the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord, the Brahma Jyotir, is not described as Mahatma in the Bhagavad Gita. He's described in a different way in the next verse. The Mahatma is engaged in different activities of devotional service as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Hearing and chanting about Vishnu, not a demigod or human being. That is devotion, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, remembering him. Such a Mahatma has firm determination to achieve at the ultimate end the association of the Supreme Lord in any one of the 5 transcendental rasas. To achieve that success, he engages all activities, mental, bodily, and vocal, everything, in the service of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. That is called full Krishna consciousness. In devotional service, there are certain activities which are called determined, such as fasting on certain days, like the 11th day of the moon, Ekadashi, and on the appearance day of the Lord. All these rules and regulations are offered by the great acharyas for those who are actually interested in getting admission into the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the transcendental world. The Mahatmas, great souls, strictly observe all these rules and regulations, and therefore they are sure to achieve the desired result. As described in the 2nd verse of this chapter, not only is this devotional service easy, but it can be performed in a happy mood. One does not need to undergo any severe penance and austerity. He can live this life in devotional service, guided by an expert spiritual master, and in any position, either as a householder or a sannyasi or a brahmachari, in any position and anywhere in the world, he can perform this Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus become actually a Mahatma or a great soul. So, any comments on that? Any questions? Yeah.
It's not a question actually, but it's like when you said, Prabhuji, when you said about acceptance. So, I don't know, when it's in this materialistic world, a lot of people don't realize that, the best thing, like what God has given is family and God who accepts us as whatever individual we are. But they try to make connections out. Like, you understand, they try to make connections out. Like, build a friendship or something out. So they don't realize, like, those are just temporary connections. And what's your
Well, the family is also temporary connections.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's from where we're born. We're born with them. We have, that's the upbringing that they have given us, and they accept it the way we are. But it's completely different when it comes to somebody out who can just judge you, or who can't. It's not a. They always want something. What do you think? What's your
Different ways I'd answer, but one way I'd answer is that we really only need acceptance from Krishna,
Yeah.
from God, basically.
Yes.
That's the real place that the acceptance should come from.
Yes.
Sometimes our family might not be favorable, so that also then becomes difficult. So I'm not saying that the family situation is there for, it can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And it could, like at the beginning of life, like you get a lot of support from the family.
Yeah.
So as the family also, it can be utilized. You can respect it. You should always be respectful.
Yeah.
To in that situation. But ultimately, unfortunately, we do have to leave the family, and then we won't have that support. In the next life.
Yes.
So we have to be careful about putting too much faith in that. Now, kind of funny is that in the West, Srila Prabhupada, when he came, he was asking people about family, and especially in America at the time. Now it's everywhere, of course. People, yeah, well, my father got divorced 3 times, and my mother had said, the kind of the understanding of family, people weren't attached to their families, at all, actually, practically, because they just didn't see that everybody was, out for themselves.
But again, Prabhuji,
No, sorry, let me finish that.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, that was beneficial, in a sense, but also it wasn't beneficial because a certain sense of how do you call it, support and love and that was somewhat missing. And so when like originally when the first experience that a child has of God is their father.
Yes.
They respect, they see this person is very wonderful person, does everything. When you have that there, then it's kind of it's easy. But if you don't have that there, then you're kind of thinking, oh God, you kind of you don't have that benefit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Prabhupada also said about people he's talking about it from India as well, that sometimes that they become so attached to their family that they forget that they're going to die, and then they might be in a family of dogs in their next life, if they don't live properly, so that's the danger, in other words, that's the power of karma. Karma means you can go up, you can go up, heavenly, whatever, but also you can go down.
Yeah.
So like for instance, the whole idea of Darwin's theories, we had this whole theory that, the species, you start off with a microbe and then you end up with this human being, and it all suddenly went from one thing to the other. Who made that happen that way? Well, no, just by chance or whatever, or whatever those type of things. But here we say, no, very clearly, karma is working all the time. It's changed. The living entity is going from one body to one body to one body to one body. And you can even see it, even in your body. You were a little baby one time, and you were a girl, and you were a woman. That's the way, you can see the changing going on. So in the time of death, you've been into another body again. So these are the, but the whole reason that these great Mahatmas come, like Srila Prabhupada, is so as to stop people in their next body going into the lower species of life. That's why he's coming and he's imploring everybody. Because that's what the majority of people are doing. They're basically heading, whoop. And in this life you've got an opportunity to go forward, But if you just waste that opportunity, by the laws of nature, you'll go way down and you will not surface again for many lifetimes. They're the laws that are there. It's not this, Darwin or whatever.
But also, Prabhuji in Hindu mythology said like when you said that, parents, we should be attached to parents and everything. But actually, in Hindu mythology, as it said, it's like when the people who give you birth, you have to look after them, because it's like they have brought us up, and it's the dharma, right? That it's like it's a. I hope you understood my point of view.
No, I understand. I agree with it.
Dharma, the one who brought you in this world was done its best to give you. So it's the dharma of any children or anything to look after the.
The main dharma of anybody in this world is to go back to the spiritual world. That's the main dharma. That's the primary dharma.
Yeah.
Above all those other dharmas. Sarva dharma parijajya. Krishna says very clearly, whole Bhagavad Gita says that point. Sarva, every dharma, give it up and just surrender. That's how it's presented, So that's what he was saying. There's a danger if you just get stuck on the family. It's very important to I did say that. But if you get stuck on the family, you're going to be, what sort of family will you get? You don't know. You just don't know. Like there's so many people that they stick with their family, but the families are just karmic. They're just interested in karmic. I want to get on in this world. At best, I want to go to the heavenly planets. But you're going to come back down again. We're talking about something serious, even more serious here. We're trying to stop coming back to this material world. That is the goal of what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to develop that energy in which we can do that. And we're trying to develop that for ourselves. And we're trying to, explain it to others as well. And if we get stuck, if you're just nice to your family, it's not going to work. It doesn't work. People will come back in the family of this family. So, we have to, be very clear what we're talking about here. And that if we don't have that, and Prabhupada says it right here at the very end of the purport. You know, he's talking about engaging all the activities. I'm not sure if I'll find it. Yeah, but if you look at this, always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worshiping with devotion. If you do that properly, all your family members for 14 generations back and 14 generations in the future will all benefit. You know. Whereas if you just kind of feed their material needs in this lifetime, they'll go to hell. If that's just the only thing that you're doing. So I'm trying to get this point that we have to be with one pointed attention. Otherwise, we'll not leave this world. Otherwise, we'll keep on coming back. You know, and that is the power of Bhagavad Gita. That's the whole purpose, even of us having this discussion, is so we all have that energy to leave this place and go to the spiritual world. But if we get distracted by other things, then we're going to end up in another place.
The lessons repeat, yeah.
All the time, yeah. Thank you for the question.
Sorry, no, I'm really sorry, but
Let me get on to the next
You
verse.
said it last lesson. Like you mentioned it in the last class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
The lessons repeat, yeah.
Good. Okay, let's do the next verse as well. Is there any other comments, any other questions? Jnana jnanena chapjane yajanto mam upasate ekatvena pitatvena bodha vishvato mukha. Others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, as diverse in many and in the universal form. Purport. This verse is a summary of the previous verses. The Lord tells Arjuna that those who are purely in Krishna consciousness and do not know anything other than Krishna are called Mahatma. Yet there are other persons who are not exactly in the position of Mahatma, but who worship Krishna also in different ways. Some of them have already been described as the distressed, the financially destitute, the inquisitive, and those who are engaged in the cultivation of knowledge. But there are others who are still lower, and these are divided into three. 1. He who worships himself as one with the Supreme Lord. He who concocts some form of the Supreme Lord and worships that. 3. And he who accepts the universal form, the Vishvarupa, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and worships that. Out of the above three, the lowest, those who worship themselves as the Supreme Lord, thinking themselves to be monists, are most predominant. Such people think themselves to be the Supreme Lord, and in this mentality they worship themselves. This is also a type of God worship, for they can understand that they are not the material body, but are actually spirit soul. At least such a sense is prominent. Generally, the impersonalists worship the Supreme Lord in this way. Second class includes the worshippers of the demigods, those who by imagination consider any form to be the form of the Supreme Lord. And the third class includes those who cannot conceive of anything beyond the manifestation of this universe. They consider the universe to be the supreme organism or entity and worship that. The universe is also a form of the Lord. Any comments? Moments of comments. What do you think of that?
I think about another verse, about 9, 12.
9, 12. Oh yeah, oh my god, yeah. It's a pretty heavy verse.
Yeah, it's common. People should depart there are many devotees who assume themselves to be in Krishna consciousness and devotional service, but at heart do not accept the Supreme Krishna or Krishna as a true. They want to know a little bit more this
Yeah. Does everyone know that question? What he's asking? Yeah. Some people actually, well, I'll tell you what it is. See, we've got a lot of different places in which ways in which we're trying to worship God, and but people they put their trust in things which are not really accurate. You know, they're not. But the particular one that you're mentioning there is, you know, is the impersonalist. You know, in other words, they don't. They think there's no such thing as personality. They just feel that we are all part of an energy which illusorily come together as people, and then somehow or other it's an illusion. Like we're all an illusion here, by the way, you know. And this is an illusion. I'm not here. You're not here. None of us are here. We're only just an illusion. But we're God at the same time. We're all God. You're God. I'm God. You know, that's how they're thinking, and that ultimately we'll all just, you know, when we get over our illusion, we'll all just merge. You know, in other words, the whole idea of character, personality, it's just some sort of a blip in eternity, and just came, and we all came, and this and God, and this is all a mistake. Ultimately, we have to blip back into being just all nothingness. That's really what they're saying, you know. And
Who said that?
this is a philosophy which is predominantly,
Yeah, this is usually, I think I find in Zen a lot, in
Yeah,
Buddhism.
you would, yeah.
There's nothingness. Or,
Yes.
Yeah, this is what,
yeah. It's
yeah.
and it's also in Hindu thought. It's kind of Mayavat. It's called.
Okay, yeah, I know it.
Yeah, and the difficulty with it is that that's not a difficulty.
There's a lot of difficulties. We're missing the bliss.
It's practically impossible. I remember spending when I was much younger, spending at least days trying to understand Zen koan. You know,
It's so dry.
that's very.
It's so dry.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it gives a little bit of a sense of discipline in the sense that you're trying to concentrate or something.
But there's no love for God, so it's dry.
No.
There's
It just has a complete,
yeah, it's
and it
dry.
has a complete. But the thing is that it's in life. It may not people they may not profess to be certain things. Okay, Buddhists, at least they profess that they're
Right.
Buddhists, but certain people, you know, in Western thought, they don't say it, but they actually are. They live it, you know, and it's how we live is what is real. It's not what we say, and it happens like the whole materialist society. That's a complete, you know, that doesn't believe in God. It's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we'll be dead. You know, so that's pervasive in the Western mentality. There's some, even some, so shows you how some of the religions are very polluted by that. The pollution is that our God is a God of plenty. So we have the pastor has millions, and everyone who comes to our church gets something. You know, it's all about me, you know. It's I want, and God gives this to me. You know, the God who is controlling the masses of the whole planetary systems. Do you think that he's just interested in helping this tiny little individual have a great time? You're really deluded, you know. And God doesn't give that information to that person. He allows that person to be completely deluded, and until he eventually can surrender. So this word surrender is so important, you know, that we have to understand who we're dealing with, you know. It is the greatest that will ever, and it gives the greatest love as well. And that's why
But only if you cry for it.
you have to cry for it.
You have to cry for it for years.
and still, it still has to be pure cry, you know. And you know, he's the arch understanding of when we really want, you know. And that takes a lot of, you know, thinking, teaching, being. So you know, that's why we spend a lot of time actually studying the scripture, worshiping the deity, and chanting, because that's almost the chanting has got a powerful effect there to help us all the time, because the mind is constantly one thing after another coming up. But if we can supplant that with Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. And then we can supplant it with consciousness of Krishna. Because he says that in the 58th verse of the 18th chapter, Krishna says, become conscious of me. If we're aware that Krishna is also here now, Krishna is actually here now with us. He's with us all the time. But if we become conscious of that, then we're making progress. Things are really starting to happen. The purification starts to happen. The ego is being, and then what happens is that we become the servant. We supplant the consciousness that I want and I'm enjoying and things are going. That's the consciousness at the moment. But what we're doing is we're gradually putting in the consciousness that I'm serving God. Oh yes, my duty is to serve God. And then God comes out of this whole situation and starts the whole loving relationship with us. So it's a powerful kind of thing which we try to develop.
Very intimate.
Pardon?
It's very intimate.
Oh, it is extreme. Exactly. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like the. That's when we get to know God. Not that I'm that great. God gives me this, and God, and I see God here, and God helps me this way. It's not wrong, but if it becomes, it's only about you. In other words, you still think you're God, because that's the whole thing. God is great because He gives me this and He gives me that, and my God gives me this, and just supplant that with I serve God. I want to serve God, and this is buried very deeply in all of us. Very, very, very deeply. You could talk about the samskaras for millions of births that is just happening. It comes out now. We're the product of all these samskaras now. It's the whole laws of karma actually up to this degree. And so, but if we can understand that it's very, very deep. This philosophy, this mantra, this philosophy, this mantra is deeper. It rid of all of that from millions of lives, and then that opens up the place for then God can come directly to us. We can have that intimate relationship that way. So it's a powerful thing that's going on here, and it's very, 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 very conducive as well for our lives. Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna. So we're going to start the next part of the program, which is the chanting of Hare Krishna. So, is there any other comment, any other questions? Oh, yes, bro.
How can I accept at heart the Supreme Personality of God Krishna?
Yeah. Well, I think if we really, start to relate with Krishna, to see Krishna's power, because this is an incredible process. It's an incredible process. Krishna is agreeing to appear in His name, and we're singing this name, and He's there and He's present, So He actually is apricot. Krishna's everywhere, but it doesn't, we can't see Him. But we're given the eyes to see Krishna in this situation by chanting His name, So, to do that with full-heartedness and with joy, with this it's probably true belief. When you experience something and you see that it's working, then that gives you more power to do it. So then your heart becomes really stronger. So to make the heart really strong, because the words that are used are determination, with great determination. And that's the word that was used in the verse. Yeah, that's 12, 15. Yeah. Anyway, John Hare Krishna. A long answer to that question. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki. So just start off chanting. Maybe if you could turn the lights a little bit lower, so we can Meditate on that. Wonderful singing response, John.
Okay, do the first one.
Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Hare
Hare Hare My voice is gone. My voice is gone.
जय जय हरि हरि बोल नमस्ते नरसिंहाय नमस्ते नरसिंहाय नमस्ते नरसिंहाय नमस्ते नरसिंहाय कल्पाय Tatattva ki Harinam Sankirtan ki Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So thank you everybody for coming. At 2 o'clock we will be doing a moving Harinam. So if anyone wants to come with us, we're going to travel around and sing the holy name. So everyone is invited to come along.
Haribol.
Shishi, come to
Jai.